Alright, so The Roundhouse, which was a book written to make readers feel despair. So basically the summary is, Joe Coots, who is 13 years old, his father Basil and his mother Geraldine are, in the beginning, essentially a peaceful Native American family, until one day when Geraldine goes out to get a file, and she comes home in a horrible state, having been raped. And throughout the story, Joe is desperate to find Geraldine's attacker and get their family back to normal. And along the way, Joe looks for help through his friends and family in order to find justice for himself and essentially his father and his afflicted mother. One of the literary devices I found was symbolism, which the thing that I chose was the folder, and in this case, it represents what the change that happened in their lives, because this folder was what essentially caused the situation that caused her to be raped, and the folder was something that Joe could blame for what happened, because there was no specific person to blame at the time. Another thing that I chose was hyperbole, and I used his tears as an example because it's kind of used to exaggerate and illustrate the way Joe feels being in the place where his mother was so violently attacked. And by exaggerating these emotions, the author does show that Joe doesn't have the coherent thought to process where he is completely, even though he does understand to a level that it is a horrible place for him and his family. Another one was imagery, and I chose the part where they explain Father Travis's impotency, if I said that right. The author's imagery of his groin area shows, that he's impotent, and by doing this, the author is physically showing us that Father Travis is in fact not the person who raped Geraldine, even though Joe and his father had assumed that he was guilty. I related Joe to Hades in A Myth of Devotion. That's what it's called. I related those two in that both of their loves for the woman of the story is selfish. Joe wants his mom to get better so that he would act like her mom, even though he does truly love her. He also loves her in a selfish fashion. And it's partially unaware of the price of what it takes to get his family back to normal. At the end, the endings are very different though, because Hades accepts that he couldn't love Persephone in the way he thought, although for Joe, it was the realization that his family would never really go back to normal and he would have to accept that. For the setting, the text is different. Anyways, the Roundhouse was set in an Indian reservation on North Dakota, and Joe mostly moves between his house, his family's houses, and the church. Each house and the church have a different atmosphere, whether friendly or violent or unhomely. And being set in an Indian reservation shows how conflicted Indians often are when it comes to crimes, especially when it comes to sexual assault, especially because of the way that the state and the reservation police treat the different cases very differently. One of the quotes that I chose was a quote from the very beginning of the book. We absorb their comings and goings into our bodies, their rhythms into our bones, our pulses set to theirs. And I really love this quote because it describes men and women in a very striking way. And it delves into the idea that a man can't function without his woman on some emotional level. Even though women are often stereotyped as lonely, this quote actually contradicts that idea. The second quote I picked was actually from the very last page, I believe. we passed over any sweeps of sorrow that would persist into our small forever, and I chose it because even though it isn't a form of justice, it's Joe's way of saying that he accepts what's happening, and he accepts that his life will never be the same as it was before he turned 13. And also, sometimes it's really easy to feel this way whenever things have changed as drastically as it has for Joe, even in not as drastic circumstances. The third quote is, "There are types of evils, did you know that?" This was something Father Travis said to Joe, after Joe had asked him about the different sins. And this question actually resonates with me just because most people think of evil as something simple and black and white, and it's either evil or good, when actually evil is a spectrum with different kinds of evil that have different reasonings and different ideas behind them. This is something that Lyndon Lark said. "I just felt so sorry for you and my heart split wide open. That's love, huh?" And this quote kind of stings, and it shows that some people have really twisted ideas of love, and they don't know how to cope with such thoughts, even though it is obvious that Lyndon did not truly love Mayla because of the way he treats her and the way he feels pity towards her, but he does in fact think that that's how love works. The scene I chose was a scene in page 161, which essentially what it is, it's Geraldine's detailed recounting of what happened with Lyndon, though it was not stated to be Lyndon at the time, between her, Mayla, and Lyndon, and essentially what he did. From a feminist point of view, the scene reveals Geraldine's actual memory of her rape. That shows how cruel the rapist was, even though we do now know that it was Lyndon. It was not revealed that way at the time. He had struck both of them several times, along with tying both of them up at different points, and it just grossly paints how horribly men can view women, even though both genders should be considered equal. From a Marxist point of view, it is obvious that Lyndon, being white, viewed Mayla and Geraldine as lesser beings in terms of class. Through both his words and actions, he demeans both women in horrible ways, and especially in the raping of Geraldine, he is, in fact, showing dominance and showing his resentment for Native Americans. A unique discovery that I found was that the author Louise Erdrich herself was born as a Native American Indian in an Ojibwe tribe. Many of her books have violent and heartbreaking themes. And after the suicide of her husband, many of her novels had a continuous setting of small Indian reservations, and they seem to be mostly set in North Dakota. For the finality, I don't think that Joe got the justice that he really wanted, and though I do understand that that's not necessarily how life works, I do think that that is unfair, and I do hope that being only 13, he's able to find some kind of justice later in life. And I really didn't like this book because the more that I read, the more that I felt that I had to force myself to continue reading. The characters felt more like ideas instead of real people, and it's just, I didn't feel a connection to any of them, so it's really hard to read a book where I don't have a connection to at least one character. And I don't really know if I would want to read more, because as of right now, I'm not a big fan of Louise Erdrich's style of writing. I'm hoping that she doesn't paint her characters the same way that she does in this book, because that would make it very difficult to read them. So that is The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich.